You're listening to the Doc Lounge podcast. This is a place for candid healthcare conversations with physician recruitment industry's top executives and thought leaders. This podcast is made possible by Pacific Companies, your trusted advisor in physician recruitment. Today on the podcast, we have Dr. Andrew Wilner. He's a neurologist specializing in epilepsy. He's a professor, an author of 4 books, his newest being The Locum Life, A Physician's Guide to Locum Tenens. And we also found out he's a dive master. What doesn't Dr. Wilner do? Chatting with Dr. Wilner today, we have Nicole Erickson, one of our Locum Tenens recruiters here at Pacific Companies, and then also our amazing Director of Recruitment Training, Chris Call. Today we're going to be chatting about Dr. Wilner's journey, everything locum tenens, stigmas, work-life balance, and all the things in between. So thank you for tuning in, and hope you enjoyed the episode.
Hi, Dr. Wilner. My name is Nicole. Thanks again for taking the time to speak with us today. So I'm a locum tenens physician recruiter here at Pacific Companies. So I just wanted to ask a few questions to open up the dialogue here. So just tell us a little about your journey becoming a doctor and why you chose neurology and to specialize in epilepsy.
Oh, but they told me this could only be 30 minutes.
Yes. I know. There's a long time in there, but do your best.
Well, let me hit some highlights that have to do with locum tenens. If we go back to, I don't know, I guess I was about 12 years old. I told you it's going to be a long story. I discovered that I was a writer, and that writing was very important to me. And ever since then, I've written short stories and essays and plays and poetry, and that was going to be part of my career. And I always struggled to balance my writing with my professional career because writing was really never the way I could completely support myself. And so through medical school and my medical internship, of course, was very demanding, and I decided during that year that I wouldn't really try and do much writing, but I did have a book I wanted to write, and so after I finished my medical internship, that was at Long Beach Veterans Hospital in California, that I would take a year off and write a book and work in the ER, and then go back and finish my residency. And so that was my first experience with locum tenens, was finding another job to help me with work-life balance way back in 1982. And the additional bonus of that experience was not only was I able to write my book and support myself, but I discovered that the patients that were most fascinating to me that I encountered in the ER, where I did everything. I sutured wounds, I set fractures, I delivered babies. But the patients who really captured my attention were the ones with neurologic complaints that had double vision or dizzy or weakness of one side or the other or a droopy eyelid. And so that's what, even though I had started my career in internal medicine, what happened was I finished my internal medicine training. I'm board certified in internal medicine, and I went on to do a neurology residency and then a fellowship in epilepsy. So it was all because I had that space in the middle of my training where I could kind of explore and find my true passion.
Wow. Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, you could imagine how different your life would be if you didn't just have that time to take off to explore the different avenues.
Yeah, if I had never done that, I'm not sure what would happen, because I enjoyed internal medicine, but I was very frustrated at the end of that internship year because you rotate every month through a different subspecialty. So a month of pulmonary, a month of cardiology, a month of renal, a month of ICU, and I liked everything, but nothing really stood out. And it wasn't until I was in the ER and kind of on my own, I was literally on my own, there was a one-doctor ER, that I discovered that, wow, these neurology cases, that's really something. Since then, I've worked locum tenens as well as permanent positions. And the locums has been very, very valuable, again, I think, for work-life balance. There was a 10-year period I worked locums pretty much continuously And I was able to travel frequently to the Philippines. It was a place I wanted to explore. I love nature, and I'm a scuba diver, and they have great diving there. So I was able to continue my training in diving and become a dive master. And I've always been interested in photography, so I started doing underwater videos. I managed to win a couple contests with my videos, and that's really a passion that I've been able to pursue because of locum tenens.
Yeah. So what was your first locum tenens job after training?
So after training, I finished the 2 residencies and fellowship, and I took a conventional job. I worked for 8 years as a member of a private neurology group and epileptologist. I ran the epilepsy center, and I saw all kinds of neurology patients. And I did that for 8 years, and then I thought, I'm really an academic kind of guy. I should get an academic job. And I could write more papers, and I'd have some help with fellows. So I took an academic job, and it lasted 1 year. It turned out that it wasn't what it was supposed to be, and I was very unhappy there, and I left. So all of a sudden I had no job, and that's when I relied on my writing for a while to sort of support myself, and then I started doing locums, and that's where that 10-year period came in. My first locums job was actually it was supposed to be a permanent job, but I decided it was a locums job. I was a neurohospitalist in Connecticut, actually, probably not far from where you are. And it was a fantastic experience. I worked every other week. And so that was new at that time, where physicians could work every other week. So 24/7 for 7 days, then 7 days off. And the 7 days off allowed me to go to conferences and continue my medical journalism and writing career.
Wow, that's definitely very diverse journey you've had so far. I know the times have changed. Back then, locum tenens wasn't, as I would say, the norm. Do you believe there's a negative stigma associated with the locum tenens community, and why?
I still hear that. I think, way back when, locums was for physicians who had trouble sort of landing a permanent job. But so much has changed since then. First of all, I did some research. We can talk about more of this later, but I did some research when I was writing a book about locums. That I think it was back in the not too long ago, 2002. I think there were about 25,000 physicians doing locums. Today, there's more than 50,000. And in 2016, there was a really pivotal event, and that was the first time that there were more physicians who were working as employees than who owned their own practice. When I graduated medical school in 1981, my goal and everybody I knew, their goal was to open your own practice and become a permanent physician in the community and spend your life there and build a successful practice. That's what people did. Well, for a lot of reasons, that model of being a solo practitioner or have a couple partners and owning your own building and is just becoming completely archaic. And so physicians now are more and more likely to become employees of a hospital system. And it's really not very different from being a locums physician. I just joined a group. Here I'm now an associate professor of neurology at the University of Tennessee in Memphis, and my initial contract was 2 years with a 90-day escape clause, so that if my employer or myself was dissatisfied for any reason, with 90-day notice, that employment could be terminated. So the 2-year contract is really a 90-day contract, and I don't see how that's really much different from locums. Mm-hmm. So I think the whole landscape of how physicians work and are employed has changed dramatically, and any stigma that there's been. 95% of hospitals in the United States use locum tenens physicians. So if there's a stigma, it's really not affecting things too much.
Awesome. So what inspired you to start writing the books? I know you have 4, the 4th one being the newest.
Right. So as I mentioned, ever since way back when, I've been a writer, and I was looking for another book to write. And one day it dawned on me, I said, I have a lot of stories, and because I've worked locums in a lot of different settings, in private practice outpatient office, in teaching hospitals, in community hospitals. And I thought, I actually have some interesting, patient stories and some interesting credentialing stories and some administrative stories. And I would talk to people and they'd say, what do you do? I say, well, I'm a locum tenens physician. They go, oh, what's that? And it always struck me that it's like, gee, somehow there's a big gap here. There's this big industry of 50,000 physicians doing locum tenens, and half the people in the country don't even know what it is. So I searched to see whether there was a book on it. I went to Amazon and a bunch of bookstores, and there was no comprehensive book on locum tenens. So I thought, this is a book, this is a niche, this is something I could write about that I know a fair amount about. And I was also interested in learning more, and that's, of course, when you write something, you really have to delve into it deeply about malpractice and running your own business and pension plans. And, being an entrepreneur, a self-employed physician, and traveling. So it was a fun book to write, and I learned a lot. And it's really the only guidebook that's out there for physicians, called The Locum Life.
That's great.
Just published January, and it's got almost every review is 5-star on Amazon.
On Amazon, okay.
And what I wanted to do also, as I wrote the book, I told my stories, and then I was thinking one day, I said, this book would be even more interesting if I could get some other voices. So I interviewed and ended up with 16 other physicians who did locums, orthopedics, physical medicine, ER, infectious disease, anesthesia, of course, neurologists, and I asked them, what was your best experiences, your worst experience, your advice to somebody, who's never done locums and is thinking about trying it. So that's chapter 20. And I think chapter 20 is a really fascinating chapter, because it's all the stories that I collected from interviews of other locums physicians and their take on practicing locum. So I think that complements the book and makes it a really, I tell people, read chapter 20 first if you're interested in locums, and then see what you think.
Okay, great. I'll definitely have to go read it. But for now, what advice would you tell a physician that is thinking about working locum tenens for the first time?
Well, first of all, you have to decide, why do you want to do it? In other words, and what phase of the career are you in? In the book, I have a chapter on immediate graduate. You just finished your residency. So people who've just finished their residency, not all of them are really ready to say, okay, I want to take that permanent position and settle down there. Some of them want to travel or explore the world, or they're not sure if they really want a hospital-based practice or an office-based practice, or maybe they have a partner who's a year behind. That happens a lot, where they're not exactly at the same level, and the partner's going to finish a year from now, and then they can both move together, but in the meantime, they're done, and they got to go to work. So for the post-residency or post-fellowship person, it's a great opportunity to travel and do temporary work, and just to kind of find your own, niche, what works, and, do all the traveling and see places that you've always wanted to do. Of course, a lot of locums physicians will combine vacation and travel. So or just earn money to pay back the loans. So you have to decide what you want to do. Then there's sort of mid-career physicians, and some of them just want to work a few extra weeks a year to make some extra money. Some of them are not satisfied where they are, and they want to try something else. Some of them want to leave medicine altogether, but locums is a way to sort of not abandon medicine. Maybe they want to run a restaurant, and or they want to go work on Wall Street, do something completely different. But locums is a way to continue one's identity as a physician, and also to stay licensed and to stay active. So if that new entrepreneurial activity doesn't fly, you can go back and resume practicing medicine. And then there's the pre-retirement group where you have a lot of physicians who've dedicated their whole lives to getting good at what they do, and now they're 65 or 70, even older, but they're still active, but they don't really want to work 60 hours a week anymore or more. And a lot of private practice groups don't really accommodate that. It's sort of an all or nothing. And if you cut back, you're kind of treated as a second-class citizen. I experienced that in my own group years ago. I wanted to take a half a day off a week for writing, and it ended up costing me a lot more money than it should have in reduced salary, and I ended up with about 3 extra hours a week, and my partners didn't really respect that decision. Whereas with locums, you can work as much or as little as you want, and nobody's judging you. It's up to you. So, somebody who's 7 years old, I have a colleague here who read my book, and he's saying, this might work for me. I think he's about 72, and he works full-time, and he's really good at what he does. And I don't think he, has ever developed too much in the way of hobbies because he's dedicated his life to this. And it's like, well, I kind of like to slow down, but I don't want to give it up altogether. And so he's looking at locums as a way to kind of continue contributing as a physician, instead of just retiring and, wandering around aimlessly on the golf course.
Mm-hmm. And on that note with locums, we have a doctor that works with us, and his story is pretty inspiring, but he was able to pay off all his student debt working locum tenens in 1 year because of locum tenens.
Right. Well, locums, from an income point of view, usually when I've worked locums, I've always been paid by the hour. So if you want to make more money, well, of course, first you try and negotiate your best hourly rate. And after that, you just work as many hours as you want. And if you're willing to work holidays, you get paid overtime. I was shocked. As a physician, you never get paid overtime, right? I mean, you just work. It's a holiday. It's a holiday. But when you work locums, a holiday, you get paid extra. So you work holidays, you work nights, and you work as much as you can work, and you can make enough money to pay back your loans. I think that's a great story.
Dr. Wilner, a question I think some locum tenens or potential locum tenens physicians might have is, will the assignment be as promised? Has that happened to you? And if so, what did you do to rectify the situation?
So yeah, right. So the whole point of locums is that you're temporary. So consequently, you're always entering a new situation. Well, you research it. You try and get as much information you can. If you're working with an agent, that's one way to get the information. About 80% of locum tenens physicians work with agencies. So if you try and establish a good, solid relationship with an agent, in my book, I liken it to working, with real estate, right? So you want to buy a house, you can just go buy a house yourself. You don't need an agent. But most people use a real estate agent because they kind of have the inside story. And some real estate agents, aren't that ethical. They just want to sell you the house. But if you find a good one, they're going to try and find a house that you're really going to be happy with so that you'll recommend them to your friends and that you'll use them when you move on to your next house. So I think establishing a good relationship with an agent is number one. Number two, I always ask, can I speak with a locum tenens physician who worked there before? Because very often these locum tenens positions, it's not the first time that there's been a position at that hospital. So there's usually somebody somewhere who kind of knows the inside story. And doctor to doctor, you're likely to get some inside information. But I would say very often you are walking into kind of an unknown. It's part of the fun of locums, but I always assume the worst, right? So there wouldn't be a position there if this was the greatest job in the world. If it was the greatest job in the world, somebody would have taken it already. So there's a locum tenens position because somebody left, or there's been an abrupt change, so there's an expansion, or something happened. There's usually a certain amount of turmoil that's created this locum tenens position in the first place. So I always assume the worst. And I've been pleasantly surprised, frankly, at every assignment I've had has been a whole lot better than I expected.
Okay, good. So going back to working with an agent, what would you say is some of the most important details that you need to know during your first initial phone call with a locum tenens recruiter?
Well, I guess a lot of it is just formalities. They're going to ask you for all your credentials, and you got to be upfront. What was your training? Have you had any malpractice issues? What's your experience? What are you comfortable in? Are you comfortable being the stroke neurologist and the only neurologist at that hospital? Is that something you're comfortable in? You want to let the agent know what it is that you can do, because once you're there, you're really on your own. In terms of the agent, you just want to see if they're trying to address your needs, just like the real estate agent. Are they really trying to help you? If you say, well, I've got 5 state licenses, and then they offer you a position in a state where you don't have a license, it's like, well, how about finding one where I'm already licensed? Make sure that you're both on the same team. I think that's important.
Yeah, definitely. A lot of the times we do run into an issue with some of our clients where the need is so urgent. So mostly we don't have that much information to begin with, but we have such a sense of urgency and we start recruiting right away. So sometimes I do run into a problem when I'm speaking with providers who want all of the information up front, but we don't have it yet. And so from your experience, would you be okay with moving on to setting up that phone interview, like you said, with one of the providers in the health system, or would you move on?
So one of the things I've learned is that staffing agents, even though they're very well versed in what they do, are not physicians. And as a physician, what you find out is that they can't really answer your questions. The things that I need to know is like, well, how hard is it to work there? How many patients a day am I going to see? Are these new patients or return patients? How many? There's no way really for them to know those things. So I don't expect that anymore. I don't really expect that the agent is going to answer my questions. So there's usually an interview, right? The client hospital will do a phone call or a Skype thing to talk to you before they hire you. So that's another opportunity to ask questions. It's like, also, what happened to the last guy? How come there's a spot? That's a legitimate question. But a lot of these questions are things that you're not going to get an answer to. So I don't really hold the agent accountable. What I'm looking for is the timing. It's like, I'm available February 1 to the end of February. I want something then. I don't really care too much about the geography because I'm going to work as hard as I can work personally. And if it's in Alaska, or if it's in Minnesota, or if it's in Miami, it doesn't really make a big difference to me because 99% of the time I'm going to be trying to accumulate my hours. And then, what's the salary? How much am I going to make per hour? I mean, I've had offers of attractive places, but they just were not paying enough per hour. It's like, well, it's just not enough. I'm not going to do that. So if the salary's good and the timing's good, then that's like half the battle. Then I want to know, well, what am I really going to be doing there? Do I have any help? Is there a nurse practitioner, a PA? What happens at night? Am I in the house? Am I at home? Those kind of questions. But you really, I think no matter how diligent you are, you're never really going to know until you start. And, with locums, you do have an escape clause, right? I mean, if it's really terrible, you just say, I'm leaving, and I think 30 days, and it's legit, and you're out, right?
Exactly.
And, you do have that possibility, so you can probably survive anything for 30 days. Mm-hmm. But that's never happened to me. And, and you kind of have to – the other thing I do stress in the book is that locums is not for everyone. Physicians are not always the most flexible people, right? And you have to be a flexible person when you go into a new situation. You're not there to fix all their problems or change the way they do things. You're there to take care of patients, and that's it. To do your best to take care of patients. I've talked to other locums doctors, and they say it's like being a guest in someone else's house. And I think that's perfect. You show up, and you do your job, and you be as nice as possible and polite. and if they've got ugly furniture, you don't have to point that out to them. You just kind of do your thing, and then you're done. And if all hospitals have all kinds of, political issues and social problems. Well, you don't, as a locum, you can skip all that. You're not going to live there forever. So you just do your work, take good care of your patients, and go home. And that's part of the beauty of it.
That's great. So do you have any other books on the horizon that we should look out for?
Well, actually, on a personal note, I'm getting ready to go on paternity leave because I have a new baby. And so I'm going to have 3 months sort of off my usual rather hectic routine. So I'm trying to put a book together in my head so I can start writing book number 5. I do want to mention that if I put together a series of short videos so that for each chapter of the book, there's about a 3 to 5 minute video that summarizes the chapters, a little bit like what I've been doing with you today. And the links to all of those videos is on my website, which is andrewwilner.com. So andrewwilner.com. And the book is The Locum Life, A Physician's Guide to Locum Tenens, which is available at a discount actually through the website or on Amazon or Barnes & Noble. And some of the comments that I got from other doctors were, well, this is the book that I wish I'd read before I started locums. So if you are considering locums, I would say there's little harm in reading the book.
Do you have, I'm an audiobook girl. Is it in audio?
Actually, that's good to hear because that's one of the things I was thinking of doing over the next 3 months of paternity leave was creating a audio version. What do you think? You think it's worthwhile?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Especially when I drive and people commute. That's why I love podcasts because I'm always listening to podcasts or audiobooks. And I've got a 100-pound silver lab and I walk him all the time. And so I always have my headphones in and I'm listening to something.
All right. Well, that's some inspiration for me. There may be an audio. Someone else has also asked me for an audio book. And there is not one yet, but there may be one on the horizon.
That's great. Well, congratulations on the baby. That's exciting.
Yes, that's very exciting. Thank you.
Did you say baby boy, right?
Baby boy.
Baby boy.
Baby
Future neurologist?
I'm very curious what his talents will be. Right now he's very curious, and he's got an amazing attention span. He can outstare you. It's amazing. He'll just look and look and look, and I think he's very curious, and I can't wait to see what his talents are.
And is this your first child?
It's my first baby, yes.
Oh, wow. How exciting. So fun.
It is.
Well, thank you so much for chatting with us today.
It's my pleasure.
Your story is super inspiring. And I mean, obviously we talk to doctors all the time and I have friends that are doctors and finding that time is so hard. And being able to, read your book and have something for doctors to look at to be able to figure out how to do that work-life balance is so helpful. So what you're doing and having this book for physicians is actually, is there to make a difference, which is great. So.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I was a little dismayed. There are physicians who are choosing non-clinical careers because they're just so frustrated, in their private practice or their group. And it's like, before you do that, try locums, where you can really practice as a physician the way you want to practice and see patients, and do what you were trained to do.
Mm-hmm. Totally. Well, one more time, it's andrewwilner.com. And I'll plug this at the bottom of the podcast so all the listeners can just click on the link. And then for your books, you said Amazon?
Amazon. I've got a page on Amazon, and just search Wilner and Locum Tenens or The Locum Life, and that should bring up this book. And of course, I have several other books, and those are all on my webpage and with links to Amazon as well.
Okay. And those other books, those are about epilepsy, correct?
2 are about epilepsy, and those are for one's for patients and one's for physicians.
Okay.
And then there's one book of essays, which is all about neurology and sort of contemporary society, and that's called Bullets and Brains.
Cool.
That's kind of a fun book.
Do you have any social media?
Oh, yeah, you can follow me on Twitter. That's actually my best place, at Dr. Wilner, at Dr. Wilner, Dr. Wilner. I'm pretty active on Twitter, and I've started with Instagram and Facebook and LinkedIn. But I would say anybody who wants to, I put everything that sort of comes out, because I write very regularly essays and news pieces and opinion pieces. I always put a link on Twitter. So following me on Twitter would be the way to go.
So one last random question. I mean, as being the marketing director here, I find that every physician kind of needs to create their own brand. And do you think having all these books and doing what you're doing, has that increased your patient volume? Are people reaching out to you to want to work with you?
I would say, well, as a physician, in terms of seeing patients, every now and then somebody will say, oh, that's the Dr. Wilner with the book. But I would say my professional life wouldn't be all that different if I didn't have any books.
Okay.
When I first started out, it certainly made me established in the community as the epilepsy expert when I had a few epilepsy books.
Mm-hmm.
But it's more for the sort of other things that I do, I think, that makes it interesting. People have reached out to me now about locum tenens with all kinds of interesting questions because of the locum tenens books. And I do some speaking and, invited to participate in this or that. So it's broadened my life's experiences for sure.
That's cool. I love hearing that. Thank you so much. We'll let you get back to, are you working today? Is that where you are?
I am. Seeing patients today. I got an EEG to read that's waiting on me, and I'll be back with the resident shortly. Well, this has been a lot of fun. Please send me the link when it comes up, and I'll tweet it at
Absolutely.
Dr. Wilner.
Thanks again, and have a great day.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
No problem.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you to all our listeners. If you'd like to be notified when new episodes air, make sure to hit that subscribe button. And thank you to Pacific Companies. Without you guys, this podcast would not be possible. If you'd like to be a guest or for more information, go to www.pacificcompanies.com.